Interview. Peter Louis Myburgh first outlined explosive claims about ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule in his book Gangster State. Now he's written about newly unearthed records from the Gupta leaks that shed further light on the rollout of the infamous Vrede Dairy project in the Free State whilst Magashule was Premier. The farming project was meant to benefit small-scale farmers, but there were claims that millions from state coffers went to Istina, a Gupta-linked company, and only a tiny fraction was used for the actual farming. The new evidence suggesting that former Agricultural Minister Tina Joemat-Pettersson and then Provincial Agricultural MEC Mosebenzi Zwane repeatedly met with Rajesh Tony Gupta at junctures as the Vrede Dairy project was rolled out. Well, Myburgh is an investigative journalist for the Daily Maverick. He joins us now via Skype. Thank you, Peter Louis. Has Ace Magashule firstly sued you about the book Gangster State as he threatened at the time?
He has not, no. There's been numerous occasions where he indicated he would pursue legal action, but at this stage, no legal action has been brought upon us by Mr. Magashule.
And remind us thus far, have there been any links between him as Free State Premier at the time and the Istina project?
Yeah, the links are now, it's reaching a point where the links are numerous. So the latest Gupta Leaks report, remember initially when the first Amamungani, Daily Maverick and Volksblad reports came out, there seemed to be quite a lot of arms linked between Mr. Magashule's office and the Vrede project. But now it's becoming increasingly clear that Mr. Magashule was very much actively and directly on the scene when the Vrede project was being put together. One example is the Gupta leaks contain these meeting records for Mr. Rajesh Tony Gupta in 2012 that indicate that at very key junctures, at key points in which government, both locally in the Free State and also on the national level, the National Department of Agriculture were making decisions around the project. Mr. Magashule, Mrs. Tina Joemat-Pettersson, Peter Tabete, Mosebenzi Zwane, they were all having meetings regularly with Mr. Gupta, not at government buildings or government offices, but at Saxonwold, where we've seen these key sort of shadow state decisions have been made in the past. That is the one direct link. The other link is the Vrede criminal case that has been pursued and has been momentarily abandoned last year while the NPA is pursuing the matter further. A affidavit by Mr. Peter Tabete has shown us that right from the outset, Mr. Magashule invited an individual called Ashok Narayan, who's a key Gupta associate, to advise him on certain governance issues. There was a Premier's advisory panel, and Mr. Narayan was invited or appointed by Mr. Magashule on this panel, which is just another very clear link between the Premier, his office, and the broader Gupta network.
Yeah, and there are also new claims about computers for poor students, but also allegedly benefiting the Guptas. Tell us about those connections.
Yeah, so this is the latest development that we report on today that's going to make it very difficult for Mr. Magashule to claim distance between his office and the Vrede individuals, the Gupta-linked individuals involved in the Vrede matters. So Mr. Kamal Vazram, who was Istina's sole director when the entire Vrede project was rolled out, really sat at the helm of the Vrede project on behalf of the Gupta family. He also had a separate company called Sunbay Trading that just happened to enter into very lucrative deals with Mr. Magashule's office, directly the office of the Premier, for the sale of laptops that Magashule wanted to hand out as part of a students' beneficiary program in the province. So what appeared on the surface to be a very noble project to hand out laptops to students in the province, those who had obtained bursaries through his government, now appears to have been really a business opportunity for the Gupta family, because we can report on these contracts that went the way of Mr. Vazram. Not only that, the Gupta leaks also enabled me to piece together the money flows, and it shows that Sunbay Trading, by all appearances, was a front for the Gupta Sahara computers, because right after the Free State provincial government makes payments to Mr. Vazram's IT company, he then funnels the money back to the Gupta Sahara computers, who ultimately is the supplier of these laptops.
Yeah. Peter Louis, one of the frustrating things for people concerned about corruption is that this case, there was an attempt to get it to court and it didn't go very far. And then you're reporting on new meetings involving a former minister, the former premier, but we've heard from officials in the past, yes, we met the Guptas, there was nothing sinister about that, we meet lots of people. So is this stickable? Could these meetings help towards any future prosecutions, I guess?
Yeah, no, they absolutely should. I think there's various developments that would feed into that. On the one hand, we do have this trove of information called the Gupta leaks that point to the involvement of the likes of Magashule, Tino Jumaat-Petersen, and so forth. On the other hand, as we are seeing unfolding at the Zondo Commission now, for instance, the testimony by somebody like Mr. Bertus Venter, for instance, who was a legal advisor in Premier Magashule's office, and then also earlier reports on the Estina matter, it all points to government decision-making that ran afoul of procurement laws and regulations that are in place to protect the public fiscus, the public purse. So, for instance, one iteration of that is that the first 30 million rand payment made by the Free State Department of Agriculture to Estina was an upfront payment that had been done without any work done by Estina. That runs afoul of procurement laws and the laws governing the state expenditure. Secondly, there were no tender processes followed to appoint Estina. That is already a well-known fact. And now if you bring into play the fact that Mr. Magashule sat at the helm of the decision-making processes around the Estina matter, that is a fact that is not in dispute anymore. As the head of the province's executive council, the EXCO, he had a formal role in approving the department led by Mr. Zwane's drive to roll out this Vrede Dairy project. So once again, it's going to become increasingly difficult for the likes of Magashule to profess innocence as far as involvement in the Vrede matter is concerned.
Yeah, and maybe more evidence is needed though, but we are hearing, I remember when journalists were invited to the farm to see real farming activity going on by the Guptas, but like we're hearing from these emerging farmers, I guess the evidence is stacking up that not many of the beneficiaries received anything.
Yeah, I think ultimately, once again, we should never lose sight of the fact that, on the one hand, these corrupt government dealings have a financial implication, oftentimes complex money laundering, webs that tend to draw a lot of the attention, of the public's attention. But on the other hand, I think that the real important developments to keep in sight is the fact that this impacts on poor South Africans on the ground. And once again, this is a very glaring instance of that, where 80 supposed or would-be beneficiaries of a dairy or agriculture project were atrociously let down by the Free State provincial government, who had promised them an opportunity to step in or, to be included in the formal agriculture sector in what looked like a very promising project, but then obviously ultimately culminated in a looting opportunity for the Gupta family and their associates.
Finally, Tino Jumaat-Petersen, so I remember her more in a different space as Energy Minister. These claims around her role as Agricultural Minister at the time, what is she saying about these meetings at Saxonwold?
Yeah, so Tino Jumaat-Petersen is now really for the first time entering the Estina saga as a role player. She's never really been shown to have been an active role player, because we'd always assumed that it was something that was largely driven by the Free State Department of Agriculture. Now the timing of these meetings, exposed by the Gupta meeting records of Mr. Tony Gupta, and the context and the kind of events that transpired around these meetings really places Ms. Jumaat-Petersen in a very uncomfortable position, because it really points to, her involvement at a key juncture in close, proximity or close meetings with Mr. with Mr. Tony Gupta. She maintains that the meetings she had were social gatherings, and that is really becoming very much increasingly difficult to believe if you consider that the first meeting showcased by a Gupta meeting record from the Gupta Leaks, took place at the Department of Agriculture's head office in Pretoria. Certainly not a place one would expect to host people for social gatherings. And then afterwards in 2012, as the Stina project was being put together, she has follow-up meetings at Saxonwold of all places. And those are the meetings she maintains were social gatherings.
All right, so follow the trail for us. Thank you very much. Pieter Louis Myburgh, investigative reporter for the Daily Maverick, with us on Skype.